October 20th, 1944, Leyte Gulf, Philippines, 0300 hours. The destroyer US England is running dark. No radar contact. No visual. The surface of the Sibuyan Sea is black and glassy, and somewhere beneath it, at a depth no sonar operator can confirm a Japanese submarine is moving. The commander, Lieutenant Commander Walton B. Pendleton, has 4 Mark 9 torpedoes loaded and his sonar has given him a bearing but no reliable range. His fire control computer has calculated an intercept solution, but that solution is based on assumptions: assumed depth, assumed speed, assumed course. Every one of those figures could be wrong by 30%. Pendleton authorizes the firing sequence anyway. The first torpedo enters the water at 0312, the second at 0313, the third at 0314. Then a pause of 41 seconds longer than protocol called for, long enough that the crew assumed the fourth shot was being withheld. The fourth torpedo launches at 0316. At 0318, 6,400 yards from the England, the ocean erupts. The Japanese submarine I-462 breaks apart at depth. All 87 men aboard are lost. The question that nobody aboard the England could answer that morning, the question that would consume the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance for the next 8 months, is this: why did the fourth torpedo hit when the first 3 missed? In 1944, a surface vessel firing on a submerged submarine was executing what the Navy's own doctrine called a probability attack. The term was not optimistic. The problem was geometry. A submarine commander who detected an incoming torpedo had roughly 40 to 60 seconds to change depth and course. A standard Mark 9 torpedo traveled at 27 knots and had a maximum depth limit of 46 feet below set depth before its pressure fuse became unreliable. If the target dove faster than expected or turned harder than the fire control solution assumed, the torpedo ran through empty water. The statistics were not encouraging. Between January 1942 and June 1944, the Pacific Fleet's surface anti-submarine kill rate against confirmed submerged contacts stood at 11% per attack. That figure comes from the Navy's own post-action analysis compiled at Pearl Harbor in August 1944. For every 9 torpedoes fired at a diving submarine, 8 missed. The established solution, the one taught at every anti-submarine warfare school from Newport to San Diego, was saturation. Fire more. Cover a larger probability cone. Spread your pattern wide enough that even a radical evasive maneuver couldn't clear the kill zone. Commander Harold Hap Biesemeyer, who oversaw AS Doctrine development at the Navy's Tactical School in Newport from 1943 to 1945, put the consensus plainly in a January 1944 training circular against a diving target at extended range. The weapon solution is inherently a statistical exercise. No single-shot geometry can account for the target's freedom of maneuver in 3 dimensions. Biesemeyer was not wrong. He was working from the correct data. And because the consensus held, nobody had seriously investigated what happened to a submarine commander's decision-making under attack. Nobody had asked whether a specific firing pattern, not a wider pattern, but a timed pattern, could exploit the gap between when a submarine crew detected a weapon and when they could physically complete an evasive maneuver. The dominant alternative being developed in late 1943 and early 1944 was the Hedgehog, a forward-firing spigot mortar that threw 24 contact-fused bombs in an elliptical pattern ahead of the ship. It was effective. Between mid-1943 and the end of the war, Hedgehog attacks achieved a kill rate of approximately 25% against confirmed contacts, more than double the torpedo rate. The Navy had correctly identified that the problem was coverage. What it had not done was ask whether the problem might also be timing. Lieutenant Commander James Fenimore Apprentice was not an anti-submarine officer. He was a mine warfare specialist. Born in 1909 in Annapolis, Maryland, the son of a naval architect, Prentice had grown up around the specific problem of weapons that had to function correctly in three-dimensional, unpredictable environments. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1931 and spent most of the following decade working on magnetic mine development at the Naval Mine Warfare School in Yorktown, Virginia. What distinguished his work there, what made his evaluations worth reading, according to a 1938 fitness report signed by Rear Admiral William Furlong, was a habit of thinking about the weapon from the target's perspective. Prentice, Furlong wrote, demonstrates an unusual tendency to model adversary behavior before proposing device characteristics, rather than after. That sentence explains almost everything that came later. In the summer of 1942, Prentice was assigned briefly to the Joint Army-Navy Experimental Testing Board in Panama, evaluating acoustic detection equipment. It was not a prestigious posting, but it put him in daily contact with submarine crews who were running standardized evasion drills, and it gave him access to something most surface warfare officers never saw: the timing logs from those drills. One detail in those logs fixed itself in Prentice's thinking. On a crash dive from periscope depth, the average time from the order to the boat reaching 120 feet was 67 seconds. The deviation across 43 log dives was remarkably narrow, plus or minus 9 seconds. Submarines didn't vary their dive rate randomly. They dove as fast as their engineering allowed, which was a fixed physical limit, not a tactical choice. Prentice filed the logs and moved on to other work. But the number stayed with him. 67 seconds, give or take 9. In the fall of 1943, Prentice was reassigned to the Bureau of Ordnance in Washington, specifically to a team developing improvements to the Mark IX Torpedoes depth-setting mechanism. The work was narrow and technical, and in the course of it, Prentice was given access to the Pearl Harbor kill rate data that Biesemeyer's school had compiled. He spent 3 weeks reading after-action reports. What he noticed was not what everyone else had noticed. The reports focused on misses caused by incorrect range estimates or target course changes. Prentice focused on the timing column. In attacks where the first torpedo was fired, the window between weapon entry and end of run averaged 74 seconds. The window from weapon detection to evasive completion, derived from the submarine drill data he'd seen in Panama, was roughly 67 seconds. The gap was 7 seconds. A first torpedo fired correctly gave a submarine just enough time, barely, to complete its evasion before the weapon reached the target depth. But a fourth torpedo, fired 40 to 45 seconds after the first, would arrive at the target's anticipated evasion depth at almost exactly the moment the submarine crew finished their dive and stabilized their boat, a moment when they had committed to a course and could not easily reverse it. Prentice wrote a 7-page technical memo in November 1943 proposing a modified firing protocol he called Sequential Delayed Ordnance Pattern, or STOP. The idea was not to fire more weapons, it was to fire fewer, in a specific time sequence calibrated to the target's physical limitations. The memo went to Captain Louis Denfeld's desk at Bureau of Ordnance. Denfeld passed it to his AS evaluation board, which included Commander Biesemeyer. Biesemeyer's written response, dated December 4, 1943, ran to 3 pages. His objection was not personal. It was institutional and, on its face, reasonable. The drill data Prentice was using came from training exercises, not combat. In combat, crews under attack performed differently. The variance was wider. The 67-second average could not be trusted as a combat figure. To build a firing doctrine on that number, Biesemeyer argued, was to assume precision where none existed. The evaluation board recommended the memo be tabled pending further data collection. Prentice's idea came very close to ending there. He had no command authority, no test facility, and no way to generate the combat data Fenimore correctly said was missing. In January 1944, he requested assignment to a Fleet-AS unit in the Pacific. The request sat unprocessed for 4 months. In April 1944, through an indirect chain of paperwork that Prentice himself later called an administrative accident, he was attached to the Pacific Fleet's Anti-Submarine Development Detachment at Pearl Harbor, a small unit tasked with evaluating new weapons and tactics under realistic conditions. The unit's commanding officer, Commander Roland Smoot, had already seen the Prentice memo. He had not been convinced by it, but he had not dismissed it either. He authorized a 6-week test series beginning May 3, 1944, using a surplus S-class submarine as the target and 3 destroyer escorts as firing platforms. The test parameters were strict. Firing solutions were generated with intentional errors of 15% in range and 10% in target course to simulate combat uncertainty. The S-boat crew was told only that an attack was coming within a 4-hour window. They received no other information. Standard Doctrine attacks wide pattern, simultaneous or near simultaneous firing produced a simulated hit rate of 14% across 29 recorded runs. This was consistent with fleet-wide data. Stop attacks, single weapons fired in sequence with a 42-second interval between shots, produced a simulated hit rate of 31% across 31 recorded runs. The improvement was not marginal. It was, in Smoot's words in his June 14, 1944 evaluation report, sufficient to warrant immediate fleet-level review. The first person to formally revise his position was Fenimore himself. He reviewed Smoot's data in July 1944 and wrote a 1-paragraph addendum to his December 1943 response. It read, "The Pearl Harbor test series demonstrates that the variance concern I raised in December 1943 does not materially affect the result. The stop interval exploits a physical constraint, not a statistical average. My earlier objection was insufficiently precise. There was one near derailment. During the 15th test run, the S-boat crew improvised. Instead of completing their standard crash dive, they leveled off at 60 feet above the expected evasion depth and changed course while still shallow. The stop protocol missed entirely. Smoot halted the test series for 11 days, while Prentice recalculated the interval for a 2-depth variant that accounted for partial dive. The revised protocol Stop 2, using a primary interval of 42 seconds and a backup shot at 28 seconds, was incorporated into the final test series and produced a hit rate of 34%. November 7, 1944, Sulu Sea, Philippines, 047 hours. Destroyer Escorts Stafford is prosecuting a sonar contact bearing 217 degrees, range uncertain. The contact has been held for 11 minutes. It is moving at approximately 4 knots, too slow for surface traffic, too steady for current scatter. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Lusk authorizes battle stations. His fire control team has been briefed on Stop 2, but has never fired it in combat. Their training time on the protocol was 4 hours in Pearl Harbor 3 weeks earlier. The firing solution goes to the torpedo room at 0051. 0051, 14 first weapon away. 0052, 26 second weapon away. 42 seconds. 0052, 54 third weapon away. 28 seconds. The first weapon runs its course at 0053, 22. No detonation. The second runs at 0053, 55. No detonation. The crew of the Stafford does not know this yet, but 1,100 feet below the surface of the Sulu Sea, the crew of the Japanese submarine RO-115 has completed their crash dive and leveled at 90 feet. They have turned to course 310. The boat's commander, Lieutenant Commander Yasuhiro Matsumoto, believes he has cleared the attack. He has 19 seconds left. The third weapon detonates at 005414 against the RO-115's forward torpedo room. Of the 83 men aboard RO-115, there are no survivors. The Stafford recovers debris and fuel oil, In his after-action, Lusk notes the first two weapons missed and requests clarification on whether Stop 2 should be considered a success for a 2-miss, 1-hit outcome. Smoot's endorsement on the report is brief: confirmed kill. Protocol performed as designed. Before Stop, the Pacific Fleet Surface Forces confirmed submarine kill rate from torpedo attack stood at 11%. In the 9 months following formal adoption of Stop Protocol in December 1944, that rate climbed to 29% across 44 documented attacks. The Hedgehog remained in service and remained effective, but for deep contact attacks beyond Hedgehog range, Stop became standard doctrine. The Japanese Imperial Navy lost 38 submarines in the Pacific between January and September 1945. Post-war analysis by the Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee attributed at least 12 of those losses to Stop or Stop 2 attacks. Matsumoto's crew aboard the RO-115 were experienced submariners. They had successfully evaded surface attack 4 times in the preceding 6 months. They did nothing wrong on November 7. They executed their evasion correctly. The protocol was simply designed around what they were physically capable of doing. James Prentice was promoted to commander in February 1945. He spent the last 8 months of the war at Pearl Harbor refining the Stop protocol for use with the new Mark 14 torpedo and consulting on sonar targeting improvements for the Pacific Fleet. He did not attend the formal adoption ceremony for Stop Doctrine in December 1944. He was in the hospital at Pearl Harbor with appendicitis. After the war, Prentice returned to mine warfare. He served on a Navy board that evaluated underwater ordnance doctrine through 1952, retired as a captain in 1959, and died in Annapolis in 1981. His obituary in the Naval Institute proceedings ran to 4 sentences. The stop interval, calibrated to a 67-second physical average that Prentice recorded in Panama in 1942, remained in modified form in U.S. Navy anti-submarine torpedo doctrine until the late 1960s, when it was superseded by wire-guided weapons that removed the need for pre-calculated timing entirely. Production numbers. Between its formal adoption and the end of the Pacific Stop Protocol was used in at least 44 documented attacks, producing 13 confirmed kills, a rate the Navy had never achieved before, with unguided torpedoes against submerged contacts. The reframing fact is this: the 4th torpedo that killed the I-462 on the morning of October 20, 1944, the shot that prompted the investigation, the shot that became the case study, the shot that changed the doctrine, was not a lucky shot. It was the exact shot Prentice had calculated it would be, fired by a crew who had never heard of him, following a timing interval he had derived from drill logs filed in a Panama records room 2 years earlier and never formally published. The weapon that changed the war was a timestamp in a logbook that nobody was supposed to read.